Okay, let's go ahead and we'll get started with today's webinar. First of all, welcome. Before we get started, let's just go over a few housekeeping items. I want to remind you, if you are having any audio issues, we have a call-in number listed here on the screen. For some attendees, it seems to work a little bit better by using a telephone versus their computer. So we have that number right there listed. Next, all attendees are muted during the webinar. However, if you have any questions, please feel free to use the questions panel, which is typically located on the right-hand side of your screen. We will pause throughout today's webinar to read and answer your questions, so we'll try to get to everyone. And finally, this webinar is being recorded, and a link of the recording will be emailed to you following the webinar, and you may also find it on the bank's first website as well. So let's get started by introducing today's speakers. First, we have Rachel Scherer, Treasury Management Officer at Bank First. Rachel has been with the bank for over 11 years. She is currently responsible for Treasury Management sales and the onboarding of new business customer relationships. She also serves as a great Treasury Management resource to the bank's existing business customers. And then next we have Dave Oldenburg. Dave is our fraud officer at the bank and is responsible for developing and maintaining the bank's fraud risk management program. He has over 21 years of banking experience, including 18 years of specialization in security matters. Rachel, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Deb. All right, welcome everyone. Good afternoon. Today we are talking about payment fraud in businesses. This is a very hot topic as of late. In the past, I'd say 5 years or so here at Bank First, we have been seeing record high levels of fraudulent activity on business accounts. And although the national numbers listed here on this slide show a slight decrease in that activity, it's still a very real problem, and we see it constantly. So what types of payments are targeted for fraud? We have obviously checks, wires, ACH debits, and ACH credits. And we're going to go over each of these in a little more detail in over the next several slides. And how are the payment fraud committed? We have business email compromise, which again, we're going to go over in a lot more detail. Dave is going to talk a little bit more about that. Outside individuals, which would be someone stealing a check, someone forging a check, things like that. A third party or outsourcer, and that would be like a vendor, professional service provider, a partner, things like that. Again, we'll talk more about this in the next few slides. So we'll start today with check fraud. Check fraud is the most targeted of the fraud that we see here at the bank and across all our payment types. So check fraud, you think in 2022 checks are going away, but they're not. Checks are still widely and extensively used by businesses for business-to-business payments. That's why it's one of the most targeted. And really businesses of any size can fall victim to check fraud. It doesn't matter if you only issue a few checks or you're someone who issues checks nationwide and mails them all across the nation. We've had customers from our largest customer, who's our large insurance agency, have check fraud, all the way down to like a local bar who pays their employees via check. So it really doesn't matter your activity level or where the checks are going. Even if you issue one check a month, you can fall victim to check fraud. And the types of check fraud that are out there are counterfeit checks, stolen checks, altered checks. Actually, Dave, I'm going to let you kind of give some examples of some of the common fraud schemes that you're seeing related to checks.
Thanks, Rachel. Check fraud, as Rachel mentioned, it's certainly not going away. It's still prominent, and it still affects our business customers. And of the investigations that I'm seeing a lot of cases involving counterfeit checks. That means the fraudster just simply takes all of the information to make that check negotiable, places it on their own paper stock, prints and distributes those items. That's probably the more common type of check fraud that I see with my cases as well. In addition, we're looking at also altered checks. Where somebody intercepts that check, it's made payable to a vendor. Somebody intercepts that check and will alter the payee on the check. They'll kind of whitewash that check or bleach that. Kind of an old term was bleaching checks. And they'll insert their own payee. Oftentimes, they'll just simply up that dollar amount too. So if the check was made payable for $300, they might extend that out to $13,000. And they'll go ahead and subsequently negotiate that. We also see simply improper or fraudulent endorsements, which can be a little tricky when you look at it on your statement. What I mean by that is somebody, if you have something made payable to ABC business, they don't alter the check, but they go ahead and they negotiate it. It's usually remote capture. They'll negotiate that to another account. So when you look at it, it may not be apparent that that check was stolen and subsequently negotiated, but it could very well be the case. Sometimes you can tell on the back spray of the check or how the endorsement looks. That could clue you in on things that are problematic. Within these investigations, the majority of these breaches appear to occur within the mail. So some of the common denominators that we're seeing, it could be your own mailbox, or it could be the recipient's mailbox. But in a lot of these cases, we're running into unsecured mailboxes where there's no security mechanism to it. So the fraudsters pay particular attention to that. They'll run out on weekends or areas where they don't believe anybody is at that particular business, like an industrial center, that type of situation. They'll come over and they'll take those checks and take all the information off that check to, either counterfeit it, or they'll do what I talked about with the simply the stealing of that legitimate check, alteration and negotiation of those checks. So be very cautious. I often talk to customers about making sure that mail is properly secured. And it's really critical, and it can avoid a lot of those types of problems from occurring in the first place.
Great, thank you, Dave. And the reason why we mention all this, because a lot of businesses don't know that really you only have 24 hours from the date that a fraudulent check has posted to your account to recognize it and then notify your bank to have that check returned. So 24 hours, that's a very tight time frame. And like I said, a lot of businesses don't realize that they're being held to that time frame. And this isn't just for BankFirst, this is all banks. All banks have to follow this. This is a regulation that we only have that 24 hours, which is not a lot of time. So you might be asking yourself, what can you do to protect your account? The best tool that you can have is something called ACH Positive Pay. It's a fraud prevention tool that BankFirst does offer. It's basically like a matching system. So remember, the bank doesn't know what checks you've issued out of your account. That's why we really don't know what's fraudulent and what's not. This tool gives us a way, gives you an opportunity to tell us what checks you've issued out of your account. You send us a file, and then as checks are clearing your account, we compare it against that list to see if anything's been altered or something's completely not on your list at all. So that's ACH Positive Pay. That includes Payee Positive Pay. That's another module that can be added on where we look at the payee name, because Dave mentioned fraudsters can wash just the payee name off that check and nothing else. Another segment of that is a check block. So if there are like separated accounts that you have that don't issue any checks, then we recommend putting a block on that account, because even if you don't issue checks out of that account, someone could still get your routing number and account number and start issuing checks out of that account. And especially if it's one you don't look at very often, you might not notice that a check has cleared that account, a fraudulent check. So that's ACH Positive Pay. A lot of our customers are already using this service, which is great. And in the last 6 months alone, for those customers using that service, we prevented over $300,000 in losses because they've returned those checks using that system within that time frame, within that 24 hours. So that's why we offer that service, because of that 24-hour time frame. It's real time looking at those payments, those checks, and notifying you of any exceptions. Another measure you can take to prevent check fraud is reducing or eliminating the checks that you send out. Now, it's not going to completely eliminate your risk of check fraud, but it will reduce it. And sending ACH payments is just a much more efficient method. You have more control over where that payment is going. You don't have to worry about your vendor's mail being stolen, that check being taken out of the mailbox, like Dave had mentioned. So it's something to consider switching over to ACH payments. It's something we've been seeing a lot of our customers doing lately due to the pandemic, and just try to be more efficient. Another measure you can take is segregating accounts. Like I said, you don't have to, there's accounts you can segregate that you don't have to issue checks out of all of them. Then you can kind of move the activity from one account to another so that you don't have all that check activity going through multiple accounts. And then the other measure that we have listed here, which is really something that everyone should be doing, is daily reconciliation. So gone are the days of waiting for your statement to come in the mail and then reconciling for the previous month, because a lot can happen in that month. And as I told you before, you only have now 24 hours to return a fraudulent item. So you really can't wait for that statement to come in the mail. So we really stress the customers logging into your online banking every single day. Every day the bank is open. That includes Christmas Eve, some holidays that people don't think about. Logging in, viewing your activity, and then really looking at every single check that's cleared in your account. And this would be if you don't have that check positive pay service. I would recommend looking at every check that's cleared your account and actually opening up the image, because like we said before, someone could just wash the payee name and nothing else on that check. So you could just visually look at your transaction, see, oh yeah, check number 1234 cleared for this dollar amount, and that's what I was expecting. But if you don't look at the image, you could see that someone washed that payee name and someone else cashed it. That's why we say to look at the image of every single check. All right. The next payment type we'll talk about is ACH debit fraud. So ACH debits would be other people who are the companies who are pulling funds out of your account. A lot of people do have companies they have authorized to do that, but you could have some unauthorized activity, right? So ACH transactions or ACH fraud is on the rise because it's a lot easier for people now, or fraudsters, to get your routing number and account number and create unauthorized ACH debits. Because again, routing numbers and account numbers, that's what's on your checks. So if someone has sent a check out and they have that information, they could simply go on to, say, their credit card's website and pay their credit card bill using your account information. It's really that simple. So that's kind of the main way that we see people doing ACH debit fraud. And again, the reason we bring this up is because ACH debits are also held to that 24-hour return time frame. So again, you have to notice that fraud really yesterday and tell your bank today that a fraudulent activity or a fraudulent transaction has occurred, and get that returned back to the bank that originated it. If you don't, then you could suffer a loss, because now we're past that time frame and the other bank probably won't accept that return. So much like check positive pay, we do have an ACH positive pay that you can enroll in to protect your account from ACH debit fraud. The way that system works is kind of like a whitelist, where you say these companies are authorized to debit my account via ACH. You can assign a dollar limit if you choose. And if anyone tries to debit your account that's not on that list or over that dollar limit, it creates an exception that you review, and you can say to pay or return. That's the simplest way that process works. Again, a lot of customers are already using that service here at Bank First, and they've prevented over $400,000 in losses in the last 6 months of ACH debit fraud. Again, the other options are reconciling your account daily, really looking at those ACH debits that have cleared your account, making sure that that is something that you authorized and that you are expecting. And kind of like the check block, we do have a block for ACH debits that you can put on your account if that's an account that doesn't have that type of activity. All right, next is wire fraud. Wire transfers are the #1 target for business email compromise. Now, Dave has some great slides coming up talking more in depth about business email compromise. So I won't get into too much detail, but high-level business email compromise can mean someone hacking your email and sending an email to the bank asking for a wire to be sent out to either your banker or maybe right to our wire department, or it can be your customer or your vendor, their email being hacked and then sending you an email asking you to change the payment information for their next wire to a different routing number and account number that would go to the fraudster's bank, right? So those are some of the common ones that we see. And we also see that really wire fraud kind of results in some of the highest losses that we've seen. So what can you do to protect your account from wire fraud? Online wire initiation. BankFirst has a product called Wire Manager where you can initiate wires right within your business online banking. You would log in using a security token, and then you also use that token before you can submit a wire. So that's the security there to prevent anyone from accessing that login and sending out wires fraudulently. And then dual control. At BankFirst, we try as much as possible to require dual control for any business that's going to be sending wires. And we do that because in the hopes that a second person would question if something seems odd, right? So whether you do the wires online or not, I would definitely recommend dual control. And if you are the business owner, I would highly recommend that you are the one approving every wire and really looking at what's being sent out. That may not work for everyone, but that usually works the best if you know what's going on within your business and what payments should be made via wire. And lastly, limit the number of employees who have access to send wires. That will prevent some of this business email compromise that we see. Basically, you as the owner have access and maybe one other person, just enough so that if you're out of the office, someone else can handle it, maybe a third person, but again, limiting that access. All right. And before we move on to our next topic, Deb, do we have any questions?
I am not seeing any questions so far. And as a reminder, if you have anything, just type your questions in to that questions panel over on the right-hand side.
Perfect, thank you. All right, and I will turn it over to Dave to talk about business email compromise.
Business email compromise is certainly a hot and heavy item, and we see a lot of these cases pop through. We'll talk a little bit about what they are, and fortunately, the good news is that they really are preventable by putting certain procedures in place. And as you can see with this slide, some of the basic email compromises, it was senior executive emails, requesting to wire funds, or somebody impersonating a vendor or supplier, requesting to redirect payments to a certain bank account, or other third parties in general. But the best way of looking at it, the business email compromise, is think of it pretty simple. It's somebody requesting a change in banking details or to redirect payment to somewhere. It's that simple, and that's how the fraudsters work. Is they're going to go ahead and hope they find the right person who is going to go ahead and initiate that. And looking at the next slide, we'll just pop that up here. There's really been an evolution of email compromises that come through. It started off with these, what I call the internal requests. These were emails that were from, a supervisor, a senior manager, other executive within the business, who just simply comes out of the blue and emails you with the sense of urgency to wire transfer funds. It started off, there wasn't really a particular reason mentioned. It was just like, hey, I'm in a meeting right now. I'm going to need you to go ahead and do this for me. It's important. These were coming out via spoofed emails or compromised emails. What a spoofed email is, for those of you who don't know, is an email that's very close to the person's actual email, but it might be off. Like, for example, it could be a 0 instead of an O, or it could be 2 L's when there should really be 1 L listed in that email. Or they were coming from emails that were completely unrelated. They weren't real sophisticated back then. Then they started evolving a little bit to breached emails. So the email that was coming through requesting to wire the funds were legitimate. So they were actually compromised, hacked emails where the fraudster had control and went ahead and sent that message to wire funds. Businesses really started recognizing this. Our customers really recognized this and said, this is fraud. I'm just simply ignoring this now. So what has happened is then you went into another version of email compromise. The fraudster is always trying to stay ahead of us. So then it came out to the next slide, which was what I called vendor impersonation fraud 1.0. This was a situation where fraudsters started obtaining information regarding your vendor relationship or client relationship, and there was a payment arrangement where there's money taking, exchanging for the payment of invoices, POs, and etc. So what they started doing then is you were seeing either a spoofed email or a compromised email from a trusted vendor. ABC company. Yeah, I work with them all the time. And the email would come through and they would request to change banking information. They'll say, hey, going forward, direct all invoices or purchase orders to the following account information. What we saw with these, though, is oftentimes the payment details, when you looked at it in closer detail, they often included inaccurate beneficiary information. The name wasn't quite right, or it was completely wrong. There was an address that might have been unrecognizable in relationship to the business, out-of-state address, etc. Things that weren't quite passing the smell test, and they started raising flags. So people started questioning this and wondering whether or not the email request is legitimate to begin with. And then we evolved. We evolved again to, on the next slide, I call it vendor impersonation fraud 2.0. And these are cases where the fraudster possesses a lot of good information. So what I mean by that is, when somebody received a spoof or compromised email from a known contact, they may reference or show a scan, a PDF scan of an actual invoice that's scheduled for payment. So it resonates with the potential victim business. They're like, yeah, I'm aware of that invoice. I'm aware that it needs to be paid. And from that standpoint, the payment details are pretty specific. So they're going ahead and they're including, the actual proper name of that vendor. They may even include the correct address. The bank may be a branch that has, is a local bank. And there could be a proper reason for the payment and so forth. All that stuff adds legitimacy to the request. We've seen these really start to take shape where it has a tendency to fool people into simply paying that invoice because the information they're providing as that smoke and mirrors are all legitimate pieces of information. With these cases, the majority of the emails that I see when we're doing investigations are in fact spoofed emails. However, to Rachel's point, we are seeing more and more hacked emails where they control the flow of those emails. So when you're looking at that email and you scrutinize that email, it's actually coming from, Don in accounts payable at ABC Corporation. So they get better and better at trying to facilitate this fraud. And this could go anywhere from, a few $1,000s in fraud, redirection on invoices to into the six figures and beyond. So when the perfect storm comes through, businesses stand to lose money in this regard. So you want to be very, very cognizant of anyone who emails or faxes when it comes to payments, when it comes to payment arrangements. You want to automatically treat that as suspect. And with the other business email compromises, we're also seeing cases where an employee of the business is reaching out to HR or to a supervisor, depending on how the situation works, and they're saying, hey, I need to change my direct deposit information. So they'll go ahead and they'll provide the victim business new banking credentials, and then subsequently the direct deposits then go to a different account or a different bank. So that's something that you obviously want to keep in mind, that emails are just simply not a source to validate anyone anymore. I mean, that's the best way of looking at this is treat everything with this healthy degree of skepticism when it comes to any kind of payment details received through email. So one of the nevers we talk about is just never conduct changes solely based on receiving an email. If you incorporate this into your policy, you're going to thwart a lot of this type of fraud. So like we talked about, if you get the email, say to yourself, it's unverified and it could potentially be fraudulent. So what do you want to do? Incorporate procedures that work best for your business, because obviously that can vary. If you get an email, you probably have a known contact on file, a phone number on file, or somebody that you deal with pretty often. You want to reach out to them and ask them what's going on here. I just received this particular request. It's a pretty unusual request when you really think about it. Most businesses are not changing banking details very often. So when you get that request, it is actually somewhat unusual, just that in and of itself. And then lastly, I really recommend that businesses develop that approval procedure to anything involving payment information, to make sure that you have a policy that's followed and a procedure that's followed to avoid becoming a victim of business email compromise. So it's very important that you want to review this and so forth. That's certainly our proactive best practices at this point.
Thank you, Dave. That's all great information. So in conclusion, we want to kind of highlight a few things that we talked about today. First and foremost, payment fraud isn't going to stop anytime soon. Fraudsters, scammers are getting better, more innovative every day. Just when we figure out how they're doing something, they figure out a different way to defraud a customer, right? So it's never going to go away. And really, we want to highlight those resources that we talked about. Positive Pay, daily reconciliation. Definitely consider those services. Reach out to your banker if that's something that you do want to hear more information about, or you're looking to implement that. And employee awareness and education, letting them know how to spot those spoofed or hacked emails, making sure they understand what's at risk here, right? And then again, as Dave said, just verifying any and all information via phone, and a phone number that you know for that employee or that vendor. Never take an email as the only source of verification, and don't email back. Always call and pick up the phone, okay? So in addition to today's webinar, Dave also did a webinar on consumer fraud trends recently, and you can find the recording of that webinar on our website at the link listed there on the slide. So check that out if you have a chance. And then I will turn it over to Deb to talk about some changes to our website.
Great. Thank you, Dave and Rachel. Excellent information. Before we close today, I just wanted to take this opportunity to let everyone know that BankFirst will be changing our website domain, also known as our URL, and this change will take place on March 15th. So note that we'll be switching over to bankfirst.com, which also means BankFirst employee email addresses will be changing as well. So we ask that you update any of your favorites or bookmarks in your browsers and update your contact information in your address books and your emails. We'll have more information on the website as we get a little closer to this change. You'll also see a new look that's involved, so it's going to look a little bit different at first. One important thing to note is that your online banking and mobile app, your usernames and passwords will not change, so there'll be no impact there whatsoever. And lastly, if you have any questions about today's webinar or any other matters, please feel free to reach out to your local BankFirst office. Shortly, you'll receive an email with a hyperlink with access to this recording, as well as a link to complete a short survey. Of course, we always appreciate your feedback, so we encourage you to complete the survey. For everyone that completes the survey, you'll be entered to win a $100 Visa gift card. So we wish you luck in that. And that concludes today's webinar. Thank you very much and have a great day.
Thank you.